I'm Josephine, 27 years old, sitting at my parents' 30th anniversary dinner when my world collapsed. All you do is take. My father spat, his voice slicing through restaurant chatter. You've never given this family anything. His words punched through me while my siblings stared at their plates. That moment crystallized years of feeling invisible, of contributions measured only in dollars. What happened next would forever change everything between us. If you've ever felt misunderstood by family, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join our community of healing. Growing up in Blue Ridge, a working-class neighborhood in Seattle, my childhood was defined by my father's shadow. Frank Wilson, construction foreman by trade and dictator by nature, ruled our household with an iron fist wrapped in the American dream. Our modest two-story home, which Dad had partially built himself, stood as a testament to his work ethic, a value he reminded us of daily. Nothing worth having comes easy, he would say, his calloused hands gripping his coffee mug before dawn each morning. Those hands provided our shelter, food, and necessities, but they rarely offered affection. My mother, Diana, a part-time nurse at Harborview Medical Center, moved through our home like a gentle breeze, softening the edges of my father's rigidity. When Dad would storm off after one of his lectures about responsibility, Mom would quietly sit beside me and squeeze my hand. Your father just wants what's best for you, she'd whisper, though her eyes never quite convinced me. Then there was Thomas, my older brother by 3 years. From his perfect attendance awards in elementary school to his full academic scholarship to Washington State, Thomas was the golden child. His achievements in mathematics made my father beam with pride I never saw directed at me. Thomas is going places, Dad would announce to anyone who would listen. He understands what it takes to succeed. What remained unspoken but clearly implied was that I didn't. My younger sister Abigail, 4 years my junior, found her place in our family hierarchy through her academic prowess and interest in medicine, a practical career path that earned my father's approval. When Abigail brought home straight A's, Dad would ruffle her hair and call her Doc, already envisioning the prestige her future would bring to the Wilson name. I discovered my love for art when I was 8 years old. Mrs. Calloway, my third-grade teacher, pulled my mother aside during a parent-teacher conference and showed her a watercolor landscape I had painted. Josephine has extraordinary talent, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. She sees the world differently. This is special. Mom proudly displayed that painting on our refrigerator. When Dad noticed it, he glanced at it briefly and asked, "What class is this for?" "Art?" I answered, hope rising in my chest. "Art?" He repeated the word flat in his mouth. "Well, it's nice to have hobbies, but don't let it distract you from your real studies." That evening I watched as Thomas showed Dad his science project, a model of the solar system that earned him first place. Dad helped him hang it from the ceiling in his bedroom. My painting stayed on the refrigerator for 2 weeks until grocery lists and school announcements gradually covered it up. As I moved through elementary school into middle school, a pattern emerged. I existed in our family as long as I was useful. When I washed dishes without being asked, Dad would nod approvingly. When I helped Mom with laundry, I received a quiet, "Thank you." But my artistic achievements, winning the school art contest, having my design chosen for the yearbook cover, these were acknowledged with polite disinterest at best. "That's nice, Joe," Dad would say, before changing the subject to Thomas's debate team victories or Abigail's science fair medals. In 8th grade, I stayed up 3 nights in a row to create a handmade birthday card for my father, an intricate paper-cut design of his favorite fishing spot at Lake Sammamish. I'd taken a photo from our family album and recreated every detail from the gnarled oak tree to the way morning light dappled across the water. When he opened it, he looked at it for a long moment, and I held my breath. "This must have taken a lot of time," he finally said. "Yes," I replied, excitement bubbling. "I worked on it all week." He frowned slightly. "Time you could have spent on your algebra. Mrs. Peterson called yesterday about your grades." The card ended up in his desk drawer, never to be displayed. By high school, I had internalized the message my worth was measured by my utility, not my creativity. I began taking on more household responsibilities, cooking dinner twice a week, doing everyone's laundry, driving Abigail to her activities when Mom worked late shifts. I did these things partly out of love, but mostly seeking approval that remained elusive. During my junior year, I overheard a conversation between my parents that crystallized everything. "Joe seems distracted lately," Mom said. "She's spending all her time in the art room after school." "That art stuff isn't going to pay the bills," Dad replied. "Thomas already has internship offers and he's only a sophomore in college. Joe needs to think about her future." "She's passionate about it, Frank. Maybe we should support what Pipe dreams." "The real world doesn't care about passion. It cares about results." I quietly backed away from their bedroom door, a heaviness settling in my chest that would become my constant companion through the rest of my teenage years. At 18, standing at a crossroads with college acceptance letters in hand, I made my first real decision for myself. Against my father's wishes, I chose to attend Seattle Arts Institute instead of the business program at UW that he preferred. It was the beginning of my independence, but also the deepening of a rift that would eventually crack wide open at that fateful anniversary dinner almost a decade later. College became my sanctuary, though it came at a steep price both financially and emotionally. When I announced my decision to pursue graphic design at Seattle Arts Institute, my father's response was swift and clear. "If you're choosing this path, you're paying for it yourself," he declared over Sunday dinner. Thomas and Abigail exchanged uncomfortable glances while Mom stared at her plate. "Don't expect handouts when you've deliberately ignored my advice." That night marked the beginning of my financial independence and the weight of proving myself that came with it. While many of my classmates received at least partial support from their parents, I juggled 3 jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop near campus, weekend receptionist at a hair salon, and late-night graphic design work for local bands, needing posters and album art. My tiny apartment, a converted garage unit with questionable heating, became both my home and studio. Despite the exhaustion of working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load, I found freedom in those cramped quarters. For the first time, I answered to no one but myself. Professor Lynette Martinez became the mentor I'd always craved. Unlike my father, she saw value in my creative perspective. "Your work has a distinctive voice, Josephine," she told me during my sophomore review. "You balance technical precision with emotional resonance that's rare." I nearly cried at her words. For years, I'd been told implicitly that my artistic vision was merely a distraction from real achievements. Now, someone respected in her field was validating the very thing my father dismissed. Still, family dinners remained an exercise in invisibility. When I shared that I'd been selected for a competitive internship at a local design agency, my announcement was quickly overshadowed. "That's nice, Joe," Mom said with a genuine smile. "Thomas, tell everyone about your promotion." And just like that, the conversation shifted to my brother's ascending career path, complete with benefits and retirement matching. My father beamed with pride, peppering Thomas with questions about his new responsibilities and salary increase. Later, when Abigail and I were washing dishes, she nudged me gently. "I thought your internship sounded cool." "Thanks, Abby," I replied, grateful for the small acknowledgement. "Will it pay well when you graduate?" she asked innocently, already indoctrinated into the family value system. "It's not really about that," I tried to explain. "It's about creating work that matters, that connects with people." She looked genuinely confused. "But how will you afford a house someday?" Her question wasn't malicious, just a reflection of the priorities she'd absorbed from our father. In the Wilson household, security trumped satisfaction every time. Despite these discouraging interactions, I thrived academically. I made the dean's list 7 consecutive semesters, took on leadership roles in the design community, and built a portfolio that impressed even the most critical professors. Senior year, I was one of 3 students selected to represent our program at a prestigious regional design conference. I invited my family to the showcase where my work would be featured. Only my mother and Abigail attended. Mom hugged me tightly afterward, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Your father had an important meeting he couldn't reschedule." I nodded, pretending to believe the excuse while knowing that my achievements simply didn't register as important in his world. Graduation day arrived in June, a perfect Seattle morning with rare sunshine breaking through the clouds. I had graduated with honors, landing in the top 5% of my class. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, I searched the audience for my family. They sat together in the middle section, even my father had come, but while other parents cheered and whistled for their graduates, my father simply nodded when my name was called. At the small celebration afterward at our family home, Thomas brought his girlfriend Sophia, who gushed over my portfolio when I showed it to her. "These are amazing. You're so talented, Joe," she exclaimed, flipping through my designs with genuine interest. My father overheard and approached, glancing briefly at my work. "It's creative, certainly. But Thomas just closed his first major client account yesterday. 30,000 in commission." The moment crystallized everything. Even on the day meant to celebrate my achievement, my worth was still being measured against my brother's financial success. 3 weeks after graduation, I landed my first professional position at Emerald Design Collective, a small but respected agency in downtown Seattle. The starting salary was modest, but enough for me to move from my garage apartment to a small studio in Capitol Hill. I bought my own furniture, paid my own bills, and for the first time felt a sense of professional pride. I invited my parents to see my new place once I'd settled in. Mom brought a houseplant and homemade cookies. Dad walked around the 400 square feet of my apartment with a critical eye. "It's small," he commented, peering out my single window at the brick wall of the adjacent building. "It's all mine," I countered, a hint of defiance in my voice. "And I paid for it myself." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps even a grudging respect, but it quickly vanished. "Well, it's a start," he conceded, though at Thomas's age he already had his down payment fund growing for a real home. And there it was again, the comparison, the measuring stick by which I would always fall short. Still, I persisted in building my life and career, taking on challenging projects at work and slowly developing my own client base on the side. I made new friends who valued creativity and saw no contradiction between artistic fulfillment and success. I dated occasionally, though guardedly, always wary of anyone who might dismiss my passions the way my father had. Each month, I dutifully attended family dinners, steeling myself beforehand and decompressing afterward. I brought nice bottles of wine I could barely afford, helped with cooking and cleanup, and listened attentively to everyone else's news while mine was treated as an afterthought. When I won my first industry award for a campaign I designed for a local nonprofit, I mentioned it briefly during dessert. "That sounds nice, dear," Mom said kindly. "Does it come with a bonus?" Dad asked. "No, just recognition," I answered, already regretting having brought it up. He replied, turning to Thomas. "So how's the market looking this quarter?" The conversation moved on, leaving my achievement behind like so much table crumbs to be swept away. I was 26 years old, financially independent, professionally accomplished, and still invisible to the person whose approval I had spent a lifetime seeking. Little did I know that just months later, at their 30th anniversary dinner, the carefully constructed facade of our family dynamics would finally shatter, forcing all of us to confront the true cost of measuring love in dollars. The week leading up to my parents' 30th anniversary dinner was among the most stressful of my professional life. Cascade Creative. Our agency's largest client had unexpectedly pulled their account after being acquired by a larger corporation with their own in-house design team. For me, this meant losing the projects that comprised nearly 40% of my workload and billable hours. "It's nothing personal, Joe," my creative director Blake assured me during our emergency team meeting. "Corporate restructuring happens. We'll rebuild." But in the shadow of my father's voice that perpetually lived in my head, it felt deeply personal. Another failure, another disappointment, another reason I should have chosen a more practical career path. That same afternoon, my landlord slipped a notice under my door announcing a 12% rent increase starting next month. Seattle's housing market had been climbing steadily, pushing creative types like me further from the city center. I sat on my small couch, calculator in hand, running numbers that refused to add up favorably. When Mom called to confirm details for their anniversary dinner, I briefly considered making an excuse. "We're so looking forward to having all three of you together," she said, her voice warm with anticipation. "It's been months since Thomas moved back from his assignment in Chicago." Guilt overrode my instinct for self-preservation. "I wouldn't miss it, Mom." "We're going to Giovanni's," she added, mentioning one of Seattle's most expensive Italian restaurants. Your father made reservations months ago. My stomach tightened. Giovanni's meant expectations of appropriate gifts, proper attire, and projecting success whether you felt it or not. The Wilson family image had always been carefully curated, our struggles kept private while achievements were polished for public display. Despite my financial uncertainty, I spent the next day searching for the perfect anniversary gift. After visiting 6 different stores, I found a custom-framed photograph of Mount Rainier at sunrise, taken from the exact spot where my parents had gotten engaged 31 years earlier. The framing alone cost nearly half my remaining discretionary budget for the month, but I couldn't show up with something thoughtless or cheap. In the Wilson family gifts reflected your values and your success. Saturday evening arrived and I stood before my mirror in a navy blue dress I'd purchased for client presentations, applying makeup to disguise the exhaustion of a week spent anxiety-scrolling job boards at 3 in the morning. I fastened the simple silver necklace my parents had given me for my college graduation, the only piece of jewelry I owned that my father had helped select, and headed to Giovanni's. The restaurant glowed with amber lighting, white tablecloths, and the gentle clink of expensive glassware. I spotted my family already seated at a corner table, my mother radiant in a burgundy dress I'd never seen before, my father uncomfortably distinguished in a sports coat and tie. Thomas sat beside his fiancée Elaine, whom he'd proposed to just 2 months earlier, while Abigail was engaged in animated conversation with our mother. "Joe." Abigail noticed me first, waving enthusiastically. At 23, in her first year of medical school, she carried herself with a confidence I still struggled to find. I approached the table, leaning down to kiss my mother's cheek. "Happy anniversary, Mom. You look beautiful." "Thank you, sweetie." She beamed, squeezing my hand. Dad offered a perfunctory nod. "Josephine, you're late." "Traffic." I lied, not admitting I'd sat in my car for 15 minutes giving myself a pep talk before coming inside. I placed the carefully wrapped package on the gift table and took the remaining seat between Thomas and Abigail. The waiter arrived with champagne, pouring generous flutes for each of us before my father raised his glass. "To 30 years with the most patient woman I know." He said, his expression softening as he looked at my mother in a way he rarely displayed publicly. "Diana, you've given me everything a man could want, a beautiful home, wonderful children, and a reason to work hard every day of my life." We clinked glasses, and I felt a momentary warmth watching my parents share a genuine smile. Perhaps tonight wouldn't be so bad after all. Dinner progressed pleasantly enough through appetizers and salads. Thomas dominated the conversation with stories about his recent promotion, which would now have him overseeing a team of junior financial analysts. "The compensation package is impressive," he mentioned casually, though the implication was clear. "We've actually started looking at houses in Madison Park." My father nearly burst with pride. "That's the kind of neighborhood we always hoped you kids would end up in. Good schools for when you and Elaine start a family." Elaine blushed appropriately while displaying her impressive engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that caught the restaurant lighting like a disco ball. As our main courses arrived, Abigail shared her news about securing a prestigious summer internship at Mayo Clinic. "Only 3 students from my program were selected," she explained, her excitement palpable. "It could open doors for residency placements later." "Our doctor," Dad said with undisguised approval. "Following in your mother's footsteps, but taking it even further." Mom reached over to squeeze Abigail's hand. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." The familiar knot formed in my stomach, the tightening tension of knowing my turn in the family spotlight was approaching with nothing impressive to share. I took a long sip of water, wishing it were something stronger. "What about you, Joe?" My mother asked, her expression encouraging. "How are things at the design agency?" All eyes turned to me. I could feel my father's gaze most acutely assessing, measuring, likely already disappointed before I'd said a word. I had planned to share only positive news, mention the small freelance project I'd picked up, perhaps talk about the industry workshop I was helping organize. But sitting there surrounded by my family's achievements, something in me cracked. Perhaps it was the champagne or the week's stress or 3 decades of feeling inadequate, but suddenly I needed to be honest. "Actually, things are a bit challenging right now," I admitted, my voice quieter than intended. "Our biggest client was acquired by another company last week and pulled their account. I'm looking at a significant reduction in my workload and income for the foreseeable future." The table fell silent. Thomas shifted uncomfortably while Abigail studied her plate. Mom's expression crumpled with concern. "Oh, Joe," she began, but my father cut her off. "Well, that's the risk with these creative careers, isn't it?" He said, his tone matter-of-fact but edged with something sharper. "No stability, no security." I swallowed hard. "It's just a temporary setback. I'm already looking at other opportunities, and you know this wouldn't happen in finance or medicine," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "People always need doctors. They always need financial advisors. But logos and pretty pictures, those are luxuries." "Frank," my mother said quietly, a warning in her tone. "What I'm just stating facts, Diana. We've always been straight with the kids about the real world." He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction at being proven right. "This is exactly why I wanted you to consider accounting or business. Something with a future." The familiar shame burned through me, but this time it was accompanied by a flicker of anger. "My career has a future, Dad. Every industry has ups and downs." "Ups and downs," he repeated with a short, dismissive laugh. "Meanwhile, your brother is buying a house and your sister is at Mayo Clinic. And you're what? Hoping someone needs a new business card design." "Frank!" My mother's voice was sharper now, but something had broken open in my father, some dam of disappointment he'd been holding back for years. He leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "Do you have any idea what your mother and I sacrificed to give you kids opportunities? I worked 60-hour weeks for decades. We never took vacations. We drove old cars so you could have new clothes and good schools. And what do we get in return?" His gaze locked onto me, zeroing in like a missile finding its target. "All you do is take Josephine. You've never given this family anything." The restaurant seemed to go silent around us. Though logically I knew other diners continued their conversations, servers still moved between tables, life carried on. But in our bubble of family dysfunction, time stopped. Thomas cleared his throat. "Dad, that's not fair." "It's perfectly fair," my father snapped. "Your sister made her choices knowing the consequences. Now she's dealing with them." I sat frozen, the weight of his words crushing my chest, making it difficult to breathe. Every fear, every insecurity I'd ever harbored about my place in this family crystallized in that moment into a terrible certainty. I was the disappointment, the failure, the one who took without giving. And in that moment, staring at my father's face across the white tablecloth of an overpriced restaurant on what should have been a celebration, I realized that nothing I ever did would be enough to change that perception. With trembling hands, I placed my napkin beside my barely touched veal scallopini and stood up. "Josephine," my mother began, reaching toward me. "Happy anniversary." I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening." And then I walked away from the table, past the curious glances of other diners, past the concerned host who asked if everything was all right, and into the cool Seattle night, where I could finally let the tears fall freely. The night air hit my face like a slap as I burst through Giovanni's ornate doors, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. My high heels clicked desperately against pavement as I fumbled with my car keys, vision blurred by tears I refused to acknowledge. Inside my 10-year-old Honda, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to regain composure before driving. "All you do is take." My father's words echoed each repetition in my mind, sharper than the last. The cruelest part wasn't just what he'd said, but the absolute conviction with which he'd said it, as though stating an obvious truth everyone acknowledged. I started the engine and pulled away from the restaurant, having no clear destination. The Seattle skyline glittered across the water lights, reflecting on the dark surface like the life I'd always wanted, beautiful, but ultimately unreachable. I drove aimlessly through downtown, past the design agency, where my professional identity was now in jeopardy, past the coffee shop where I'd worked double shifts to pay for art supplies, past the community center where I'd volunteered teaching design basics to underprivileged teens' contributions that registered as nothing in my father's ledger of worth. Memories crashed over me in relentless waves. my 16th birthday when I'd asked for art classes and received a practical business calculator instead, my college graduation when my father's only comment was concern about my student loan debt. The Christmas I'd hand-illustrated personalized storybooks for each family member, spending months on the project, only to watch them flip through the pages with polite disinterest before moving on to Thomas's gifts, expensive watches purchased with his first bonus. Rain began to fall gentle at first, then with increasing intensity, matching the storm building inside me. I pulled into a viewpoint overlooking Puget Sound, cut the engine, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. You've never given this family anything. But I had given. I had given everything. When Mom underwent surgery for her gallbladder 3 years ago, it was me who took 2 weeks off work to care for her cooking meals, managing her medications, driving her to follow-up appointments. I'd lost a client because of the absences, but never mentioned it. When Abigail's college boyfriend cheated on her during her sophomore year, I drove to Portland in the middle of the night to bring her back to my apartment, where she cried for 3 days straight. I held her, listened to her, reassured her of her worth, all the things I wished someone would do for me. When Thomas needed wedding invitations for his engagement to Elaine, I designed them for free, a service that would have cost thousands from another designer. I spent weekends creating custom illustrations of their favorite places, hand-selecting paper stocks, coordinating with printers. My gift was dismissed as something Jo can just whip up on her computer. And Dad himself, how many hours had I spent designing marketing materials for his construction company's website, creating presentations for his bids, making brochures for his company's services, all unpaid, all unacknowledged, all expected. My phone buzzed with incoming texts. Mom first, please come back. Dad didn't mean it. Then Abigail. That was horrible. Are you okay? Where are you? Even Thomas. Dad was out of line. Call me. Nothing from my father. I silenced the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of my car like impatient fingers. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, I called the one person who had always seen me clearly. Marissa, it's Jo. I need to talk. Can I come over? My best friend since sophomore year of college, Marissa had witnessed every up and down of my relationship with my family. 20 minutes later, I sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea fortified with bourbon, recounting the evening's events. He actually said that in the middle of a restaurant, Marissa's expression shifted from shock to outrage. Jo, that's not just rude, that's cruel. The worst part is he believes it, I said, voice hollow. After everything, he genuinely thinks I've given nothing. Marissa leaned forward. Let's make a list. A list of everything you've given that family, everything you've done, every sacrifice, every contribution, every time you showed up. She grabbed a notebook and pen from the counter. Start talking. For the next hour, we documented it all. Every unpaid design project, every holiday I'd organized, every emotional crisis I'd managed, every time I'd set aside my own needs for my family's benefit. The list grew to fill 3 pages. Jo, Marissa said, finally tapping the paper, this isn't nothing. This is thousands of hours of your life, thousands of dollars of professional work, countless emotional contributions. But it's not what he values, I replied, the truth of it settling heavy in my chest. It's not money. It's not prestige. It's not the kind of success he can brag about at his golf games. That's his problem, not yours, Marissa said firmly. The question is, why do you keep trying to measure your worth by his broken yardstick? Her words hit me with the force of revelation. For 27 years, I had contorted myself trying to fit into a definition of success that was never designed to include me. I had been playing a game I could never win by rules I had never chosen. What would happen, Marissa continued carefully, if you stopped trying to prove your worth to him and started honoring what you know is valuable? I don't know, I whispered, though something was awakening inside me, something that felt dangerously like liberation. I've never considered that option. Maybe it's time you did. I stayed on Marissa's couch that night, falling into exhausted sleep around 3 in the morning. When I woke, pale sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains, I felt different. Raw, certainly. Hurt, absolutely. But beneath those familiar pains was something new, a clarity I had never allowed myself before. My father's words had always been the heaviest weights I carried. But perhaps the real tragedy wasn't what he thought of me, it was that I had given his opinion such power for so long. I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls and texts from my mother, 2 voice messages from Thomas, and a long emotional text from Abigail expressing her outrage at Dad's behavior. Still nothing from my father. Instead of responding immediately, I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I'd been working on for months, but had been too afraid to submit an application for a creative director position at a small but innovative design studio that focused on nonprofit clients. The deadline was today. With hands that no longer trembled, I completed the application, attached my portfolio, and pressed send before I could reconsider. Then I texted my mother. "I'm safe. I need some time. I'll call you tomorrow." For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't rushing to smooth things over to maintain the family peace at the expense of my own well-being. Whatever came next would be different. I just didn't know yet exactly how. 2 weeks passed before I found the courage to confront my father. During that time, I existed in a strange limbo, going through the motions at work while ignoring the steady stream of messages from my mother and siblings. The only person I had spoken to about that night was Dr. Elena Reyes, the therapist I started seeing 3 days after the disastrous dinner. "What you're describing is a pattern of emotional neglect," Dr. Reyes explained during our second session. "Your contributions weren't valued because they didn't align with your father's narrow definition of success." "But maybe he's right," I argued weakly. "Maybe I haven't given enough." She leaned forward, her expression compassionate but firm. "Josephine, I want you to try something. If your best friend came to you and shared this same story about her father, what would you tell her?" The question stopped me short. "I'd tell her his behavior was unfair and cruel, that her worth isn't measured by her income, that creative work has real value. So why don't you deserve the same compassion you'd show your friend?" It was a breakthrough moment, simple but profound. Over the next several sessions, we worked on preparing for an eventual conversation with my father. I wrote out everything I wanted to say, practiced responses to his likely dismissals, and developed strategies for maintaining boundaries. On a rainy Tuesday evening, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. I knew my father would be home. Tuesday was his night for watching sports while my mother attended her book club. The familiar driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike, the porch where we'd taken countless family photos, the door I'd slammed during teenage arguments all seemed smaller now, less intimidating. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, a small but significant choice that positioned me as a visitor rather than a member of the household. My father opened the door, surprise registering on his face before he could mask it. "Josephine," he said, my formal name always his preference. "Your mother isn't home." "I know," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I came to talk to you." Confusion crossed his features, but he stepped back to allow me entry. The living room television blared with a baseball game, which he muted but did not turn off completely, a subtle indication that my visit was an interruption rather than a priority. "Would you like something to drink?" he offered stiffly, fulfilling the basic requirements of hospitality. "No, thank you. This won't take long." We sat across from each other, him in his worn leather recliner, me perched on the edge of the sofa where I'd once built blanket forts as a child. The physical distance between us seemed an apt metaphor for our emotional relationship. "Your mother's been worried," he began, a hint of accusation in his tone. "You haven't been answering her calls." I needed time to process what happened at the anniversary dinner. I said, refusing to be derailed from my purpose. "Dad, do you remember what you said to me that night?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Things got heated. We all say things sometimes. You said I've never given this family anything." I interrupted, the words still painful to repeat. "That all I do is take." "Josephine, it was your mother's anniversary dinner. You chose that moment to complain about your job situation, and I reacted." "I wasn't complaining. I was being honest about a challenge I'm facing. The way family members should be able to do with each other. He sighed heavily. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry. Fine. I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. The non-apology might have once been enough for me to retreat to smooth things over for the sake of family harmony. Not today. I don't want an apology that puts the problem on my hurt feelings instead of your words, I said calmly. What I want is for you to understand something. I reached into my bag and pulled out the list Marissa and I had created, now typed and organized chronologically. This is a partial record of what I've given this family over the years. I began reading aloud. Age 16, stayed home from junior year spring dance to help mom prepare for grandma's funeral. Age 19, designed company logo and complete branding package for dad's construction business, market value, $4,500. Age 22, took 2 weeks off work to care for mom after surgery, resulting in lost client worth $3,200 annually. The list continued item after item, year after year. My father's expression shifted from impatience to discomfort to something that might have been shame if I'd believed him capable of it. Josephine, this isn't necessary, he attempted to interrupt. It is necessary, I countered. Because you need to understand that giving isn't just about money. It's not just about prestigious jobs or down payments or retirement accounts. It's about showing up. It's about using your talents to support the people you love. It's about emotional availability. I set the list on the coffee table between us. The problem isn't that I haven't given enough, Dad. It's that you've never valued what I have to give. He stared at the list, silent for several long moments. When he finally spoke, his voice had a defensive edge. You've always been so sensitive. So dramatic about everything. Thomas and Abigail never needed this kind of validation. Because you freely gave it to them, I replied, a lifetime of hurt surfacing despite my best efforts at composure. Their choices aligned with your values, so they received your approval. I chose a different path, so I received your disappointment. I wanted security for you, he insisted. A stable future. No, you wanted me to be someone I'm not. Someone whose achievements you could understand and brag about. Someone more like you. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. So what now? What do you want from me? To pretend I think your career choices are practical, to act like I'm not concerned about your future. The question hit me differently than it might have before. What did I want from him? For decades, the answer had been simple approval, love, acknowledgement. But now I saw with painful clarity that those things might never come, at least not in the form I'd always craved. What I want, I said slowly, measuring each word, is for you to recognize that my worth as your daughter isn't tied to my income. That my contributions to this family have value even if they don't come with a paycheck. That I deserve basic respect even when you disagree with my choices. And if I can't give you that, he challenged, though something in his expression had shifted, as though he was beginning to grasp the gravity of the moment. I stood, gathering my bag and the list from the table. Then I'll need to protect myself by limiting our relationship until you can. I love you, Dad. I always will. But I won't keep subjecting myself to the kind of treatment I received at that dinner. You're giving me an ultimatum. Disbelief colored his voice. I'm establishing a boundary, I corrected. There's a difference. I moved toward the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. The baseball game continued silently on the television, players running bases and celebrating victories in a world where the rules were clear and the scoring objective. Our situation was messier, with decades of emotional patterns that couldn't be resolved in a single conversation. I hope we can find a better way forward, I said quietly. But that will require both of us to change. I left without waiting for his response, the door closing softly behind me. In my car, I didn't immediately start the engine. Instead, I sat watching the house where I'd grown up, where I'd first learned that love could be conditional and worth was measured in dollars. Rain streaked down my windshield, blurring the familiar outline into something less defined, less solid. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth without apologizing for it. I had named the pain without minimizing it. I had set a boundary without collapsing it at the first sign of resistance. It wasn't resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. The weeks following my confrontation with my father unfolded in unexpected ways. I had braced myself for anger for cutting remarks delivered through my mother, perhaps even for being disowned in dramatic fashion. Instead, I encountered something more complicated: silence. My phone remained conspicuously quiet from my father's number, while my mother called daily with increasingly transparent attempts to broker peace. "He's just processing, sweetheart," she assured me during our third conversation. "Your father isn't good with emotional confrontation." "I'm aware," I replied, trying to keep the edge from my voice. Mom had always been Dad's interpreter, translating his gruffness into something more palatable for us children. It was a role I now recognized as enabling rather than helpful. "Give him time," she pleaded. "Family is everything to him, even if he doesn't show it well." What surprised me more than my father's silence was the response from my siblings. Abigail called the day after my confrontation, curiosity evident in her voice. "Mom says you went to see Dad alone," she began without preamble. "What happened?" I gave her the condensed version, expecting her to side with our father as she typically did. Instead, she was quiet for a moment before saying, "You know he does the same thing to me sometimes." "What do you mean?" "Compares me to other med students. Questions if I'm in the right specialty track because dermatology doesn't sound serious enough." Her voice grew smaller. "Sometimes I feel like I could win a Nobel Prize and he'd ask why it wasn't too." The revelation created a new bond between us, a shared understanding that had never existed before. For the first time, I saw my sister not as the favored youngest child, but as another woman struggling under the weight of impossible expectations. Even more surprising was Thomas's reaction. My brother, who had always seemed so comfortable in his golden child role, showed up at my apartment one evening with takeout and an unusually vulnerable expression. "I owe you an apology," he said, setting containers of Thai food on my small dining table. "I've been complicit in how Dad treats you." I stared at him, speechless. "When he compares you to me, when he dismisses your work," Thomas continued, "I've always just sat there. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, but really I was protecting my position as the successful one." His honesty disarmed me completely. "I never expected you to fight my battles, Thomas." "Maybe not, but I could have been a better ally." He opened a container of pad thai steam, rising between us. "The truth is, Joe, I'm not as happy as everyone thinks. The job, the money, the house in Madison Park, it's all part of this path I never questioned because it was easier to follow Dad's blueprint than create my own." "You don't enjoy finance?" I asked, genuinely surprised. He shrugged. "Parts of it. But the pressure never stops. Every achievement just raises the bar for the next one. I'm exhausted all the time, and Elaine and I barely see each other despite living in the same house." He looked at me directly. "At least you're doing something you love." The irony wasn't lost on me that my brother, the family success story, envied aspects of my disappointing life. That evening marked the beginning of a new relationship between us, one based on authentic connection, rather than the roles we'd been assigned in our family narrative. While my personal relationships evolved, my professional life took an unexpected turn as well. The creative director position I'd applied for the morning after the disastrous dinner, a long shot by any measure, resulted in an interview. The Studio Horizon Collective specialized in branding and design for environmental nonprofits and social justice organizations. "Your portfolio shows a strong technical foundation," Lena Winters, the founder, told me during our meeting. "But what really stood out was the emotional intelligence in your work. You seem to understand that design isn't just about aesthetics, it's about communication, connection, meaning." Her words resonated deeply, validating the very qualities my father had dismissed as impractical. 2 interviews later, I was offered the position with a salary that, while not matching what Thomas made, provided security and growth potential I hadn't experienced before. The morning I accepted the offer, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the evidence of the life I'd built independently. The furniture I'd chosen, the art I'd created, the space that reflected my values rather than someone else's expectations. For the first time in months, I felt the tightness in my chest begin to loosen. That same week, I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. Sitting in a circle of strangers who shared remarkably similar stories, I realized how universal my experience was. How many of us carried the weight of conditional love of worth, measured by achievement, rather than existence. The hardest part, shared Maria, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s, was accepting that my father might never be capable of giving me what I needed, that I had to find that validation elsewhere. How did you do that? I asked the question coming from the deepest part of me. She smiled sadly. By building a chosen family who valued me for exactly who I am. By recognizing when I was seeking approval from other authority figures as a substitute. And eventually, by becoming my own source of validation. Becoming my own source of validation. The concept was revolutionary, that I could be the one to determine my worth, to approve of my choices, to celebrate my successes without requiring external confirmation. I began practicing small acts of self-validation. When I completed a challenging project at my new job, I took myself out for a nice dinner, instead of calling family members who might minimize the achievement. When I felt the familiar urge to seek my father's approval, I wrote down what I would want him to say, then said those words to myself instead. Gradually, I established healthier boundaries with my parents. I attended family gatherings but left when conversations became toxic. I shared my successes selectively, offering information as statements rather than questions seeking approval. When my father made dismissive comments about my career, I calmly noted that we saw things differently and changed the subject. These small shifts created noticeable changes in our dynamic. My father, faced with my new resilience, seemed unsure how to engage with this version of his daughter, who no longer sought his validation at any cost. The most surprising moment came 6 months after our confrontation, when I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter from my father. His handwriting, angular and precise, like the architectural drawings he'd done early in his construction career, covered 3 pages of his company letterhead. Josephine, it began formally as always. Your mother tells me I should call you Joe as that's what you prefer. I'm trying to remember that. The letter continued awkwardly, full of starts and stops, crossing out and revisions, so unlike my father's usual declarative style. He didn't explicitly apologize for his words at the anniversary dinner, but he acknowledged that he had, perhaps, been unfair in his assessment of my contributions to the family. The list you showed me, he wrote, made me realize there are many forms of giving that I've failed to recognize. Your mother has been telling me this for years, but I suppose I wasn't ready to hear it. The final paragraph contained the closest thing to vulnerability I'd ever received from him. My father measured my worth by my paycheck. It was the only language of value he understood, and I learned it too well. I never meant to make you feel less valuable because you chose a different path. I just didn't know how to show love except through financial security. It wasn't a perfect letter. It contained no grand epiphany, no complete transformation. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that perhaps there was more than one way to measure a life well lived. I wrote back thanking him for his honesty and suggesting we meet for coffee the following week. The cautious email exchanges that followed led to an equally cautious meeting at a neutral cafe halfway between our homes. You look well, he said by way of greeting, his eyes taking in my new haircut, and the confident way I carried myself, small external markers of the internal changes of the past months. I am well, I replied simply, better than I've been in a long time. We talked for nearly 2 hours, navigating the new territory of a relationship based on mutual respect rather than authority and obedience. He asked questions about my work, real questions that suggested genuine interest rather than veiled judgment. I shared the creative challenges of my new position, the satisfaction of designing for causes I believed in. I don't fully understand what you do, he admitted at one point, stirring his black coffee. But I can see it matters to you, that it uses parts of yourself I never appreciated. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Our relationship remained a work in progress. There were still difficult moments, old patterns that emerged when guards were down. But something fundamental had shifted, not just between us, but within me. I no longer needed his approval to feel worthy. I no longer measured my success against Thomas's financial achievements or Abigail's prestigious career path. I had found my own metric for a life well lived, meaning connection, authenticity, and the courage to honor my own values even when they diverged from those I'd been raised with. 3 months into my new position at Horizon Collective, we won a major contract with an international conservation organization. The celebration dinner included my entire family, my father somewhat stiff but present, my mother beaming with genuine pride, Thomas and Abigail openly supportive. When the conversation inevitably turned to Thomas's recent bonus, I felt none of the familiar inadequacy. His path was his, mine was mine. Both had value. As I looked around the table at these people who had shaped me for better and worse, I realized that the greatest gift I had given myself was the freedom to define success on my own terms, to recognize that my worth was inherent, not earned through achievements or income or anyone else's approval. That night, driving home under a canopy of Seattle stars, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The journey hadn't been easy, the wounds weren't all healed, but I had finally learned the lesson that would carry me forward, that the most important validation comes not from others, but from within. I am enough. I have always been enough. And in that knowledge lies a freedom no paycheck could ever buy. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family expectations and how you've learned to define your worth on your own terms. Have you ever had to set boundaries with loved ones to protect your sense of self? What helped you recognize your inherent value beyond external measures of success? Please share in the comments, and if this story touched you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Remember, your worth isn't measured by what you earn, but by who you are and how you show up in the world. Thank you for listening to my journey.